Welcome back, friends. This week we are joined by Jordan W. Anderson to, well, I can't break this to you any other way. We're going to talk about EverQuest for quite a while, but it's pretty enjoyable, so join us, won't you? Yeah, by the way, there's not going to be any kind of intro for this. At some point, the volume will just fade up and we'll have already been mid-conversation. But on that note, how do you want yourself styled when I actually put out the episode? Do you want it like Jordan W. Anderson or?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Well, the traditional first question of Let's Get Weird About and the previous show is, if someone was to ask, who is Jordan? What do you hope the answer is?
Ooh, what do I hope the answer is?
Mm-hmm.
That's more like a positive contribution to society that stays out of the way of everything else. I don't know.
Okay. Sure.
The reality is I'm a sarcastic introvert.
Fair enough, man. There's plenty of us out there.
Yeah, I'm the person that at the office everybody expects to chime in with the smart ass remark when it's something like mundane they're talking about. And I'm just like, but this is how I interact with people.
Sarcasm is a love language, man. Like, you guys got to know that I'm only ragging on you because like that's I feel comfortable enough to do that.
Oh God, isn't that the truth?
Yeah,
I feel like the more I know somebody, the harder I am on them. It's not intentional. It's just
sure. No, it's like how you like communicate that, like, you know, we're on, you know, like I don't know the psychology behind it, but like it's a really common, like super like normal thing to be like, oh yeah, let's like totally bust each other's balls because we're friends. Like if people are nice to me, then I'm worried, right? Because like,
yeah,
what do they really think?
It's like, what's happening? I'm ill prepared for this.
Yeah, I don't know about you. Growing up in the South here, it's like the you know, the nicer somebody is, the worse they like the like, you know, the church ladies are the nicest people, but like they're the ones who are really talking shit behind people's backs. So like maybe it is something growing out of that too.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Northern California, so it's kind of weird because I grew up in a place that it's not quite a small town, but it relies a lot on its history.
Sure.
And it's like the rumor mill is always going because a lot of people knew everybody else.
Oh, yeah.
It's weird. It's like I moved to a place that is almost exactly the same, like 15 years later.
If you don't mind asking, what kind of kid were you?
Oh, I was very much a kid that kept to themselves, kind of for a myriad of reasons. A lot of that was just because my family situation mandated that I just kept my head down. Well, sure. We'll kind of put it that way.
Sure.
But
so did that coincide with a lot of like reading, video games, you know, escaping into media, or?
Yeah, at a certain point, I was never a big reader.
Okay.
I mean, not to say like I was an advanced reader in school, but I just read stuff to read stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife joked because I hadn't read Dragonlance. I think we mentioned this the other day. Like I didn't read it until I was like 22.
Yeah, I still haven't read Dragonlance.
And she's like, why? This is like a middle grade book. I'm like, what? Really?
I mean, like, there's a habit people have of like what do you mean you haven't read blank, you know, like, and feeling sort of like there's a framing of when somebody's missed a piece of media or content or book or movie or whatever. And like when people react sort of incredulously to me, the older I get, the more I'm like, man, what a shitty way to treat, like there's no fault for like not having read a thing or not having seen a thing, you know? And like, and there shouldn't be any kind of guilt associated with like, oh, you need to do this. Oh my God, you have to do this. Oh my God. You know, like there's this sort of like, I know it comes from a place of enthusiasm, usually from people where they like something so much that they want to share it, but the framing of it can be so negative where it's like you somehow screwed something up because you just happened to not have read a particular book or movie or something like that, you know?
Yeah. That's, I mean, I think we all do that to a degree still.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
It's
like,
just sort of the language, but yeah.
Yeah. Like, oh, tell my wife, it's like, oh, you have to watch this. And
Yeah.
It's like, no, I don't want to. I'm like,
well, and
okay.
the reality is that there's so much good stuff out there now that like you can't possibly get to everything that's good. Like it just, you are just going to have to write off huge swaths of culture because you literally just do not have time, you know, like, and even if you had infinite time, even if we all lived to be, you know, infinite amount of time, it's now being made so fast that you couldn't possibly keep up. So like, you know, just like let people live their lives a little bit, you know, like it's just like, there's nothing, we're all going to miss stuff, you know, that this is why, you know, we're just going to start immediately off topic here. So there's no such thing as off topic on this show. I know we have like a thing we're going to talk about, but like this is one of my reasons I'm actually pro spoilers. Like I think people should spoil stuff for other people. I think you should tell people about the plots and things that exist in other in stories and movies and stuff like that, because there's a pretty good chance that they're never going to see the thing that you're talking about. And so for you to have any kind of like common ground about something, you have to be able to talk about it. And possibly by talking about it, you're going to give them enough information that maybe they will want to see it. But like oh, you haven't seen X. Well, I don't want to spoil it for you, so I'm not going to talk about it at all. Well, like that just shuts off an entire part of the conversation that you just now the two of you can't have. Whereas previously you could have talked about your impression of it, given your, you know, critique of it, talked about what was in it, and like actually had a conversation, and maybe they would want to watch it or not. But like, yeah.
Well, it's funny too, because we have the like the arbitrary date for when spoilers are allowed.
Oh yeah, which is different for lots of different things too. You know.
Yeah, and I think part of it comes from a well-meaning place, at least, though, because you're like, hey, if you watch this, I don't want to reveal this big plot. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like you could, like, hey, this may be of interest to you because this or these things happen, and I know you like this kind of story, but you don't want to go, this thing occurs.
I forget. There was a lot of worm conversation on the Breathing Space Discord. Are you a worm reader?
No, I'm not.
Okay. So, well, not to spoil it or whatever, but like that is a massive, I mean, it's 1.5 million words, right? Like it's 2.5 Harry Potter entire series. Right. And the only reason I read it is because I saw spoilers. Like I saw things in that and I went, I have to read that fucking thing. Like something cool things were told to me about this series. And then I went, yeah, fuck yeah, I'm signed up. Like I would never have read it blind. And I think, so there's a real value to just like, you know, understanding stuff, you know, like, well, like anything that's old enough that there's, you said it hits that sort of arbitrary point where people start talking about it. And like, again, you just kind of have to know that like Rosebud is the sled that in Citizen Kane, like, that's just like, come on, man. Like, that's fine. Like there's not everything's an M. Night Shyamalan movie where like you have to like protect some part of the plot from the audience knowing, but
yeah. And I mean, anymore, it's so hard. Like I remember trying so hard not to read anything about No Way Home.
Okay.
And just,
yeah.
It's like, I don't want to know, but I want to know.
Yeah. Well, and like there actually have been like empirical studies that most people, if they know what they're getting into, like if they have the plot of a story described to them, they self-report having enjoyed it more. Like that, like actually being spoiled, knowing what you're getting in for, like knowing what is going to happen allows people to enjoy it more, weirdly enough. So like the going into it cold thing, I think for most media is kind of overrated. I understand the sort of instinct of like, I want to protect that first viewing because you go in without expectations and you can have surprise and stuff like that. But I think good media really like survives when you know what's going to happen. Like I will contend that knowing the plot of Knives Out, knowing everything that happens in Knives Out before you watch Knives Out is fine. That movie is 100% enjoyable, even though that like, you know what's going to happen, you know the mystery, but like now you get to watch it with like another level of understanding and you get to see when they're setting up foreshadowing and you get to go, oh, look how clever that is that they're going to reveal it. Like it, I don't know. It really works for me at least.
And I mean, you can kind of attribute that to remakes and stuff too.
Oh, sure.
I remember when they did the first remake of Evil Dead, not Evil Dead 2, but the one, I don't remember what year it was, 20 something. And I went and watched that in theaters and I'm like, I'm smiling the whole time because I know all these things are going to happen. And, you know, they're doing all these hat tips and having the classic in there. And I'm like, yeah.
Especially when they do a remake and you can tell that they're doing it out of a sense of like love for the original. Like they're not trying to like fix it. They're not like, well, I mean, like maybe they're trying to fix it, but they have respect's not even the right word, because you can't treat something with like reverence, but that you can like love it and want to celebrate the things that are good about it. And that makes it all the better for having been, you know, comfortable with the original. I remember somebody lamenting the other day. I saw a post that somebody was like, why don't we do like every cover songs are such a good part of music. Why don't people do that with movies? And I'm like, we are literally doing that with movies all of the time. They're called remakes. We do them about 20 years after the original comes out. Well, we are here. We did have something on the docket for us to talk about. And this is one of those ones that I have a little bit of experience, a little bit. I lost about a year to EverQuest.
Only a year.
Yeah, only a year. But here's the thing. I don't know anything about the plot of EverQuest. I don't know if there was a story, even a little bit.
Oh, that is so hard.
Yeah, which it feels very much MMO to me. But since you are now our subject expert, can you tell the audience, in case they don't know, what is the sort of top line description of what EverQuest is?
So EverQuest is a fantasy MMO. It was kind of one of the, not the original, but probably the biggest of the era in terms of popularity, and kind of launched MMOs into like the popular eye. I mean, it ended up taking over the crown from Ultima Online.
Yeah, there's a sort of progression where it was like Ultima Online. Again, it wasn't the first, because like MUDs existed before Ultima Online, but like Ultima Online was ascendant, and then EverQuest was ascendant, and then World of Warcraft was ascendant. It was like this. There's like an era of Morpegs where it was the EverQuest era. Like if you were playing a Morpeg, you were probably playing EverQuest.
Yeah. But let's see, it was released in March 99, and it just, I mean, it's still alive.
Yeah.
But it is very much based in MUDs, and the kind of like the older D&Ds, not, I want to say it was like 2 point or something. Not, I think it was 2. It wasn't 3.
Yeah.
But, you know, fantasy elements where you're fighting, you know, typical orcs, goblins. It gets a little weirder later on.
Yeah. Furry cat people on the moon. Yeah.
But
I say that with affection. That's one of my favorite parts of that world. But yeah.
I do not like the Vashir. But it's very much a game that requires a lot of attention. It requires teamwork. I mean, you can play solo to a degree, and as time has evolved, you know, people can run multiple computers and characters and things like that. But at the core, it was made to be a team oriented game.
Yeah. You can solo to about level, or at least at the time, you could solo to about level 10, and that was the point at which you kind of hit a brick wall where you needed to be in a party to get anywhere, which is definitely different than how MMOs are constructed now. There's definitely a sense that you can mostly play by yourself almost all the way through.
Yeah. I mean, Warcraft, you can completely play by yourself. You're doing things in raids and groups, but you don't have to have affiliation with any of these people.
No. And you could play 1,000 hours in World of Warcraft and never in a group. You'd be fine. You would have things to do. There's a whole game there that doesn't require a group. Whereas EverQuest was of the era that like, no, you hit level 10 and you're going to need to find some people.
Yeah. It's like, do this or don't play.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, it's heavy in fantasy tropes. I mean, the idea of the Holy Trinity, which people are not aware, your tank cleric, damage dealer, which I think traditionally is a rogue, are all, it's pivotal. It's the anchor of how you do things in the game. But unlike a lot of, unlike a lot of modern games, you have to find a lot of things on your own. Compared to where, you know, World of Warcraft or any other modern game, they force feed you stuff along the way, you know, to get you to move on, compared to where EverQuest is, you kind of learn from everyone else.
It's interesting because as I'm thinking about it now, the experience that I had with EverQuest felt much more like how I hear people talking about EVE Online, where like so much of the infrastructure of EVE Online happens within the community as opposed to happening like within the game programming itself. Like there's so much happening within the people, and EverQuest definitely has a lot more of that. A lot of the infrastructure of the game itself sort of existed within the community.
Oh yeah, and I mean there are things set up, like, and the culture of it varies a little bit depending on what the servers you played. Mostly it's similar, but if you think about, like, there was no trade hubs in the early game. Like there just was no centralized. They didn't put one in until like a couple expansions into the game.
Yeah.
But it was
when
like,
you're talking trade hub, you mean like an auction house, I think.
Yeah. They called it the Bazaar. It didn't launch until Shadows of Luceland, which that's a controversy. It's Luceland, not Lukeland.
Oh, the joy of all internet words, all words that have to do with tech that existed before there was, YouTube and constant people talking, where there's the debates about, because everybody looks at a word and they intuit, they go, that's how that's pronounced.
Yes.
I know how that's pronounced based on how it looks. And that's how you get GIF versus GIF. And the one that bugs me lately is SUDO, sudo or sudo, which drives me up the wall. Sorry. Real off topic.
But to my point, what I was saying is people ended up setting up just the impromptu auction house in a zone called East Common Lands, because it was more central. It was central to like the humans started in a certain city, the dark elves, halflings weren't that far away. It was more central place, and I mean that kind of changed over time because of the way continents were and stuff too. They kind of set up in GFA, which I remember more of that, or Greater Fate Arc, but everybody ended up calling it Faymart. But yeah, it was a game that a lot of it is done by social. I mean, so much anymore, with the way things change. It's a different game than it was 20 years ago.
Oh, for sure. And I'm sure that just the lower number of people actually logging in day to day, because I'm sure there's a bell curve to these things where they get popular, and then they're in that. I'm sure they're now a decade or more into the long tail where like they actually probably aren't seeing as much drop off now day to day, but it's just because the people who are there are just like lifers, I guess. They're just going to be there forever.
And it's all driven by people that have just played in forever and invested in this. And I would actually be very curious to see what the new player adoption rate is versus all these new accounts that are created for people just making like secondary characters to play with their group.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. What a fascinating person you'd have to be to pick up a game like EverQuest fresh and new, like at this point, as opposed to just like, oh no, I'm still here.
Oh no. Yeah. That's what's funny is like it has the like a hardcore tag now. Okay. And in comparison, when you think about what's out now, absolutely. Oh yeah. I mean, there are things that make it way easier than it used to be, but even still, I mean, that it's not a game you can just, like Warcraft, just walk through, or, like things have picked up after Warcraft and just kind of done similar things. It's just kind of, I don't want to say handhold you, because that's kind of insulting, but gives you a guidepost, I guess. Sure.
Well, I mean, like there is just an evolution of the language of game design over time, and more sort of UI and designed experiences that like direct the player and like give player assistance is just part of UI, like part of game design now. It's just it's something that we didn't used to do, and now we are doing very much. Like I went back, one of my favorite games of all time is Baldur's Gate 2, the original isometric top down RPGs, and I went back and booted up the enhanced edition a while back, and I was like, oh man, like I love this game, but my brain is no longer wired to work in this world. Like it is no longer set up to remember every single thing that I was doing the whole time through, and like keep track of not just like what I was doing, but where the person I talked to was. I now am so used to like, I go someplace and I get a waypoint or whatever, and then when I complete the quest, I get a waypoint back to the guy. And like, but no, like the EverQuest is from the time when like you were expected to, hey man, fucking write it down if you need to.
Oh no. Yes. 100%. Or, I mean, back when the game started, there were no maps.
Yeah.
So you had to rely on maps that people drew and put on a coordinate system. So because that's that, one of the things that kind of carried over from MUDs is there's a lot of text-based commands.
Sure. Oh yeah.
So I mean, a big one is con, which is your seeing how you're comparing what a character or NPC or monster is versus your level. So that's kind of how you know not to mess with it or not. But then you have other traditional ones like location or loc that's what you would use back then to be like, okay, I know I need to go to this coordinate based on this character drawn map. And you're just playing this game where you're like, kind of darting around trying to get the numbers to line up on the screen with where you're supposed to be.
It's so interesting because you maybe had a flashback to like, am I remembering correctly that there was a cartography skill that you could build up over time by like actually mapping areas in the game? Does that sound?
No.
No. Okay.
There was
maybe I'm thinking of something else.
What was it? There was a fun button called Sense Heading.
Okay.
That basically told you what direction you were looking.
Oh, weird. Interesting. I have a distinct memory of like walking around some MMO map. Literally, like you have to just like map the whole, like you can literally just walk around a zone. And as you get close to walls, they show up on your personal map. And you have to, early on, you have to actually map them out. And then at some point, I think you got the ability to like buy maps from other people. I must be conflating it with another experience, but
well, now you got me thinking, because I don't remember the way that I'm old.
Sure. Yeah.
So there is this gap in memory, especially when that stuff first started coming out, when the maps were, because I think you could do it that way.
Okay.
Because there was actually tools that you could use within the map program.
Yeah.
So maybe, I'm thinking of it in terms of like an in-game skill, but it wasn't an in-game skill.
Okay. It's just like tools for doing your own mapping.
Yeah. But I mean, eventually people would upload them and you can just import them.
And it's entirely possible that whatever I'm thinking of also could have existed for a limited time, possibly, or again, I might be conflating it with another game. But the weird thing about especially very, very long running MMOs is that like the game itself changes so much over time that like if you logged back in a decade later, like it's entirely possible that literally nothing transfers over, that everything is literally different. So like two people can have two very different experiences within the same space.
Oh yeah, that's what's kind of funny too, is if you haven't played for 10 years and you log into the live servers, which they basically call them live servers, which is the traditional ongoing what the status of the game is now. And then you have your TLP servers, which are your time lock progression ones that they release a new set every year. But it's like those get to a fixed point in time, or operate in a fixed point of time, but you still have the modern conveniences. But if you look at it from that point, if you started one of those and jumped on the live server, there are so many other things and new spells and new things you have to manage, and it's like
yeah. It's MMOs do provide a very unique experience of like not very unique, but an interesting version of your player base growing. Not in terms of number, but like the players themselves are getting these expansions over time. And so they're picking it up. And so you can get like a huge expanse of skills and knowledge deeply about the game because you've been living in it for so long. And you were not info dumped originally. You got it piecemeal as these things came out. And so it can become very, very complex. And there's all kinds of meta and stuff. I was never big on again, I played EverQuest for a while. I think it might not have been an entire year. I think it might have been about 9 months. And I didn't get particularly far. I was never doing like proper like meta theory. I didn't really know how all of the how to min max and stuff like that in that game. But I got that far in WoW, where I was doing I don't know if we did do at least one first on server raid boss kill or two. Yeah, I think we were the first ones in during the Burning Crusade era. And like literally like in my head, I still have a little bits and pieces of information from like the calculations that I needed to do to get my threat per second up high enough in order to be able to keep mobs off of my DPS at the time. And like those things like still live somewhere deep in my brain where I'm like, oh yeah, there's a reason why, like, because we built it up over time.
Yeah. And that's a fun, like, I know a lot of this is rooted in nostalgia.
Sure. Oh yeah.
But it's you learn skills. Like they're very only applicable to that, but it's like it becomes ingrained. And like I kind of similar things. I remember having a certain weapon on one of my characters that, you would do augments and things like that to get extra damage on them, or they had procs or special abilities on them. And I had one that just had this massive proc on it. And I had to well, this has gone off like 3 times in a row. I need to switch out this weapon to something else.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And you're like, crap. Or I remember like the Paladin epic would kind of give warriors issues sometimes because I had a built-in stun. And it's like, because that's the last thing you want to do is be fighting a raid boss and have it turn and face the raid and just start smacking everybody.
Right. Yeah. And like, I can remember, I mean, like, we're talking about skills. I still have a very strong sense memory of doing song weaving. Was that what it was called for bards? Because that's what I played. Was that
twisting?
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. Because that was what I spent the most time playing as. So for anybody who doesn't know what's going on, you have multiple bard songs when you're a bard and EverQuest, or at least at the time you did. And there was a little bit of a drop off when you switched from one to the next, where like one would still, your previous one would be active and your next one would be active. And if you worked out the timing properly, it wasn't that difficult to keep 2 going at a time because you could switch from 1 to 2. And then it was a little more difficult to get from 1 to 2 to 3 and keep all 3 of them going. And then, but there are people out there, who were very consistently keeping, I do not know what the numbers would have been at the time, but I remember building up that skill over time where most of my game was I target a guy, put the command in for /follow. So I'm just following somebody else while we move through a dungeon. And I'm not even like playing the same game. Basically, I am mostly concentrating on making sure that I keep 3 or 4, or however many of the number it was of my bard songs up so that we could get the benefit of all of them going.
Oh no. And that's just the way it works for some classes. Yeah. I mean, things kind of changed over time. So you can do tricks. Like if you're a buffing class, you can just keep the timer on yours and have to remember like, hey, I was the last one to cast. I have 3 minutes left on mine. I need to recycle back through everything. Yeah. The kind of a point back to bards. That's a thing they actually changed later on.
Okay.
They introduced something called melody.
Okay.
That did it on its own.
Gotcha.
I mean, there were exceptions you couldn't do. Like you can't put damage ones, I think, on there or something like that. But I was never really a bard player. But I mean, I remember having to do things like in early EverQuest, like busting out stopwatches.
Oh yeah. I believe it. Yeah. Well, I'm sure when you're trying to like, especially if you have stuff like, trying to figure out like, I don't know, about phases on bosses and stuff like that, where they're going to do different behaviors, either on time based or on damage based, like trying to figure that stuff out before like it was being telegraphed to you by the game system's environments. I'm sure like, half the time you're sitting there with, graph paper, probably trying to figure shit out.
Oh, like, okay, or like early raid days when you were doing like Plane of Fear or Air or Hate. The bosses have an ability called Death Touch that basically would cycle every minute. Okay. So whoever had the highest threat at the time would get nuked insta-death. Right. And then you have to start that over. So there was always someone in the raid keeping track of how long that was. And you'd get like a certain second warning where they're like, anybody that has a taunt button, start mashing it so it gets off the buff tank.
Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, on the one hand, I probably realistically, I probably wouldn't actually want to get involved in something like that, especially now with as little time as I have. But there is definitely something like, right, it's probably nostalgia, but like there's definitely something very interesting about like not giving those tools out and like people having to sort of find them and build them. That definitely feels very different. It definitely takes me back to like the old school RPG days when like I was playing games with a notepad next to me, drawing out the maps on by hand because there was not one built into the game. So you had to just like figure it out and, making notes about like, okay, when I went here and did this And there is something definitely rewarding about that in a way that is, because of the extra effort and extra ingenuity, that gives you a certain amount of investment that when you then overcome and succeed, despite them not holding your hand the whole way, that definitely does like affect your emotional experience of the game. You know, you're sitting there going like, yeah, I did this myself, you know, and like this was not just an experience that I was curated for me by a game developer, but one that I sort of had to fight them for, a little bit.
Yeah. And I can think of other things that, you know, like to kind of go back to the mapping thing.
Yeah.
A very common thing to do would be, especially in zones that were too high for you, you would run along the walls.
Yeah.
And
oh yeah,
relatively safe, not 100% safe, but relatively. But like, I still remember sometimes like there'd be a tree or something like at a certain point in the wall, and you're like, okay, that's where I need to cut over. That's where I need to start like going west or something instead. And like, or like, I remember like if you run around the walls in Kithcore Forest, there's like a guy you have to kill for the rogue epic down there, and if you get too close, you're screwed.
right. Yeah. The one of the very first things I remember doing in EverQuest was, because whatever expansion was out at the time had just come out or whatever, and so I bought that, or bought the collection that got me what I needed, and then stupidly made a character of a race that started me off in a city not anywhere near anybody else I knew who was playing. So like the first thing I had to do was like find somebody out there who knew enough about the system to like literally guide my hand through, just so that I could get to the right starting area, so that I wouldn't have to play the first, you know, however many levels by myself. And it literally was like, okay, you know, go through the forest until you get to such and such a tree. And then you need to go here, and then you need to like, it was like directions like from like when you stopped at a gas station, they're like, okay, you need to go go 5 miles this way until you see the big tree, and then turn left. And like there's like a set path that people had figured out for low level people to get through.
Yeah, and kind of the cool thing about it is it especially at a low level, it never felt 100% safe.
Oh yeah.
Because like I can think about times, you know, starting in Faye and then having to run to like, if you ran to Kanos, you're kind of insane. But you know, there's certain choke points of zones you had to go through. Like you had no option. And if you're like certain race combos, like you might be kill on sight, and you have to worry about that. And
because there was a big thing about like you had to build up your relationship with various factions, because you'd start off bad, and like it wasn't as simple as like in WoW, where it was like, okay, you're a horde, all the horde people are going to like you. It was like, no, you're an elf. Well, those fucking dwarves are going to kick your ass, man, because they do not like elves.
Yeah. And what's kind of neat is if you think about like the D&D alignment scale, EverQuest had something sort of similar, not really exactly similar, and it's mostly pointless now. But when you started a character, I mean, certain characters hated certain things. Like if you played an Ixar, everybody hated you regardless. Okay. Just everybody hated you. But you had the selection of what god you worshipped. And you really got no perks from it or anything like that. Later on, they tied in some like special armor and stuff that you can only wear if you were of that, if you were worshiping that deity. But like if you were a human and say you worship Bertoxulus or Bertox, I'm just so used to shortening him. That you couldn't enter in the city the normal way. You had to go in through the underground sewers. You know, because just the normal one hated you. Or one of the kind of the crappiest things is there was a raid in a place called Plain of Growth, which was the home of the god Tunair, which that is like one of the only gods as an elf you can pick.
Okay.
So if your guild is killing Tunair, you have to like you either have to zone out, hope you die in time, or just take the hit and then never be able to go back to your hometown. Which really got complicated later on, because when they put in the origin button as one of the anniversary rewards, you would teleport to a place in your origin city.
Oh, okay.
And and I mean, there were other limitations. Like I played a half elf paladin for a long time. And because of the way that I played on a PvP server, so you had 4 different teams that would be amongst each other. So elves were their own team, dark races, which was like trolls and ogres, things like that, or humans were their own. That's kind of where I had to be.
Yeah.
and like there was kind of there was all kinds of bottlenecks in EverQuest.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
for a lot of things. But I getting the Paladin Epic was one of a kind of annoying thing, because you had to, at a certain level, you could no longer access 2 of the entities that dropped pieces you need as part of a raid. And and later on they put in some other ones that replaced that. But they were much, much harder. And, and none of these pieces were guaranteed to drop. So if you weren't in a guild that killed them all the time, getting that epic was kind of hard. But in, Velius, they changed it for elf paladins, where you could get a sword that was kind of equivalent, but if you ruined that faction, you couldn't get it.
There's something like, there was a mentality that used to exist in game design of like, we're going to do it, like we're going to create a system, not because we're concerned about everybody having a good play experience, but like, no, this makes sense. This is what that should be. Like somebody like just coming, sitting down and looking at a piece of building, like, well, this is the god of the elves, and we're going to make him a raid, and we're going to put some loot on him. Like if you don't, if you happen to be an elf, you kind of fuck you, man. Like that's kind of because like, not like a little bit of like, we don't care if it's fair, you know, we don't care if it's like an ideal experience that everybody's going to have. Like we're just going to, sometimes you're going to have bad things, are not going to exist ideally for you. Which is like, I'm not sure I miss it, but I also do definitely feel sort of fondly about experiences I had within places like that.
When the game is borderline abusive to you.
Yeah, a little bit. Like, I guess this is where our grandparents got the, like, I used to walk uphill both ways in the snow to work, to school. But like, yeah, there's a little bit of like,
it took me 3 years to get max level to a Warcraft player that did it in a month.
Yeah. Like for sure, things that you had to work harder for, you're going to like feel better about, you know? And so making things hard kind of arbitrarily sometimes does create value, just because the people who do get it go, oh yeah, I feel much better about it. Although it does also lock a bunch of people out of ever getting it because it's too much of a pain in the ass.
Oh yeah. And I mean, the other part of that is there was always politics involved to a degree. Oh, like when you're in terms of like higher end stuff, when you're in raids and stuff like that. So
yeah.
I mean, with the things that drop randomly, there does become the element of, well, now you can do things like you can do a point bidding system where people can spend points, or, you know, based on how long they're there, or you can do things where like the officers of the group assign it to people based on, you know, whatever arbitrary rule set they think. And you know, there's nothing feels worse when you're passed over an item like 3 or 4 times when you're there putting in the work all the time. But that's just the way it was created.
And did they even build in like the sort of need versus greed bidding systems, or was that all aftermarket people, sort of like people just accepting the way, you know, like you had to like not, you understood that you weren't going to loot the boss until the officers of the guild did it. Like you just had to like rely on people to be honorable.
Yep. And I mean, eventually they changed that. They actually put in a looting system where you could do need versus greed stuff, but even still a lot of guilds, they don't use it, and they'd get quite upset if you didn't turn it off. And you know, the kind of what changed that over time is they could assign things to people. So, so that kind of alleviated some problems. But I remember at one point I was in a guild and I was playing a Beast Lord, which Beast Lord's one of their main components is they have a pet, and the pet is a significant portion of their damage. But the guild that I was in did not let Beast Lords use their pets. Okay. Because the people they had were terrible at controlling them.
Oh, so they just had a bad experience with some people, and therefore they're like, well, screw this entire thing. Yeah.
It's like, screw this mechanic. You're just here to do these 2 buffs. I don't care what else you do. Just go eat a sandwich, you know, whatever. But I had to change their minds on that. But there was still like inherent bias, because there was, unfortunately, like pet items were grouped for Beast Lords, mages, and necromancers, because those are all classes that relied primarily, or at least partially, on pet DPS. I got passed over for this one zone 5 times and given to necromancers, which don't even have to have a pet. And it's just, it breeds that, like, why am I doing this? It's like, I love to feel like crap. I don't, You know what I mean? But it has that element of, the game wasn't created fair. So people do operate within the system they're given.
Yeah. And like, oh yeah. No, I remember again, like, I guess some of my experiences map a little more closely onto my time with WoW, because I was much more involved with WoW. But like, I remember having to like make the argument that a paladin could be a main tank for a raid, like, because the culture of, no, it's warriors. Warriors are our main tanks. It's always going to be a warrior. Warriors are just better at it. And I was like, no, I can do this. Like, I'm good enough that even if maybe like in a theoretical world, the perfect warrior is better than the perfect paladin, I'm good enough that I can do this job. Like, I figured it out, and like, give me a chance. And like, sure enough, when they finally gave me a chance, I was able to do especially able to handle multiple threat or keep more things on me, multiple targets, and generate threat on them in a way that the warriors just couldn't do. And but I had to, that was not a particularly egregious fight, but I did have to convince some people of it, make my case. And that was not something that was built into WoW. That was just something that's naturally emergent about anytime you get a bunch of people together trying to do a thing.
Yeah. And I actually give them a lot of credit for that, because later on you had, depending on the expansion or what fight you were using, you warriors were not always the best tanks.
Oh yeah, no.
I mean, because you can have like in WoW, Death Knights were kind of a mixed bag in tanks, but later on they were good, but they were always good at crowd control, or, like warrior or druids could take a hell of a hit for a long time. And it was because it was just a raw AC, or monks with their huge avoidance as brewmasters, and, but I don't, that's a newer concept. I say newer, but new is in like the last decade.
Oh God. What? No, that's not even, when did WoW start?
WoW was like 2001. No,
I remember.
I was deep in EverQuest when it came out.
Yeah. No, I remember. I remember what apartment I was living in. I do not remember what year it was. Yeah, it launched November 2004, so 20 years ago.
Way off.
Oof. Yeah. God, I feel old. Okay.
Two old dudes talking about video games in a better day.
Okay. Hey, two old dudes talking about old video games is like 90% of podcasts. So that's fine. It's interesting how, because just remarking, because I know that there's still a very active World of Warcraft community out there. There's still obviously EverQuest servers of people running those. There's still people playing Ultima Online, I'm sure. I know there are people out there still playing Ultima Online. There's something about these, specifically the MMO experience, that I think really engenders that sort of like ride or die, I'm going to do it forever personality type, where people start to do it kind of not even because of the game anymore, but it's just because they've built communities and it's sort of built into their life. That I remember all of the it was not exactly scare coverage on television. It was just sort of like, hey, look at these weirdos coverage of people talking about like people getting married in World of Warcraft and stuff like that. And I'm like, now I'm looking, to me, that seems almost normal, because I was in those communities as well. But like, it definitely does build a place in you as a person and within your community and friend groups, where it becomes like part of the culture that of your community, Yeah,
and it was very strange too, and it was definitely. I mean, this is an era of the internet where, a lot of scare happening. You talk about visiting somebody you met on the internet, and it's like they're gonna murder you or something, and.
It's so weird how it's different now. It used to be like, do not tell anybody your real name ever, and now it's like, if your username is not your real name, we think you're very suspicious.
Oh God, it's worse than that too, because and I mean, this mentality is still around, and I really hate it. But you're always told, like, if somebody plays a woman character, it's not a woman. Yeah, and like thinking back, like how sexist that was, and. I mean, I know there's still that mentality now, but it's kind of gross.
Yeah. I mean, the amount of grossness that exists within online gaming spaces is very large. the unfortunate thing is, of course, that like at the time it was a space very much dominated by men. And so I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of female players just allowed that assumption to happen because that was easier for people to assume that they were men so that they would not suffer all of the consequences of having people know that you're actually a woman. I wouldn't fault anybody at all for just letting that go. But that also, you know, helps reinforce all of the shit that everybody's thinking about. Everybody who's playing a girl is a dude, you know?
And I got kind of lucky in a way that I got introduced to EverQuest through one of my friends that I went to high school and elementary school with. And, you know, he was lucky enough, or I was lucky enough that he kind of showed me a lot of the ropes and kind of told me what I do and would help me out because he had been a player since beta and, you know, had a lot of knowledge and knew what to do. And, it's that, like, I was lucky that I had someone I could talk to about that without having that weird kind of stigma around it. And kind of the stranger bit of that later on is I would not have the main relationship in my life without that game.
Okay.
I met my best friend in there. I met another one of my close friends, close friends, and I met my wife in EverQuest. Yeah. So it's like this whole, for a long time, it felt like I was the exception to the rule.
Sure.
But you also hear about a lot of things to where that's a lot of relationships were made in that.
Yeah. I had a really good work friend, a couple of jobs ago who, same situation for him. He met like all of his close circle and his, at that time, wife, through EverQuest. And it's like, oh yeah, we just like, you know, we're in the same guild. We got to know each other. The people will find community anywhere. That anywhere there are people finding community in those places. Just about, I'll bet. And it's like something very beautifully human about that, where like people are going to remain the same even in digital places that like in a lot of definitions don't exist, but because people gather there, they sort of make them exist. You know, the EverQuest as a game is just some lines of code on a server and, you know, some clients and people are running, but because you meet people there and those relationships can continue and last, and the influence those people can have on you is something you're going to carry forward. Those places become real, you know, even if it's just essentially a glorified chat room with some punishing game mechanics attached to it.
There is some, I mean, especially with EverQuest, because it was such a, I keep saying it was, but it is. And maybe it's just in hindsight because I'm thinking about the past. I mean, even though it's a game I jump on probably like once every other year. But you get into such a rhythm because of all the grinding mechanics and stuff, or you'll just, you know, banter with the people that you know, guildmates or your close friends, or, you know, even during raids to distracting agrees sometimes. And it was very much a chat room with pretty pictures sometimes.
And a common goal and like some stress. Like I do think that stress is an important part of building relationships with people, like actual relationships, not just sort of like surface level friendships. I feel like that's part of the reason why, you know, the people you knew in high school, especially if you were on like teams with them and stuff, but like the like common goal, working hard for something, experience is, I think, actually engenders a certain amount of because it's a way of building camaraderie, that it really does actually, like, it will build relationships in a way that maybe just a straight up chat room wouldn't, because you're sharing something about being there, but then also you have goals, you are, you know, experiencing setbacks together and triumphs together, and that creates a communal experience that can be very powerful.
Yeah, you're all in the mud together, kind of.
Yeah, literally. In cases of before Ultima Online, you would have been in a mud, a multi-user dungeon together. Okay, I'm not gonna get a better joke than that at this point, so we're just gonna go out on a high. Jordan, if our lovely listeners want to find you somewhere on the internet and see more of your content, where could they find you?
Probably the easiest place is just on Instagram. Jordan W. Anderson is what I'm on there. I don't post often and as much as I should, but it's probably the one I use the most. But
Sure.
I do try to post about the things I'm involved in.
Awesome. Is there anything you want in particular you want to plug?
Not really right at this moment. I don't have any of my own projects going, but I do have the 5-episode arc in Breathing Space that just started, which I'm very proud of that. Still in the middle of kind of wrapping it all up, but
yeah,
I have yet to do something that in depth in this space. So I'm very,
that's awesome,
very happy about that.
Yeah, I'm also similar. Well, I think you're further along than I am, but like I am so I'm not even keeping my head above water on Fable of the Family at this point. Like I am so far below the water that I'm just seeing the like shimmery sun far above me.
Every once in a while you just get that glimmer of light and you're like, I need to hold on to it. Come back.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we will catch the audience at some point in the undefined future because this program does not have a schedule. They just come out whenever I'm done with them. So bye.
Oh, jeez.
Thanks again to Jordan for the nerdy good time, reliving my old Morpeg days. May they never come again. If you'd like to support our show, perhaps you could hire a plane to write "Let's Get Weird About" in the sky above your city, or rate, review, that kind of thing. Or if you want to support us monetarily, head on over to patreon.com/cursedknowledge. Sling a couple of bucks our way. Or if you want to find other shows in our network, library.horse is the URL. Join us next week when we're going to be talking about Bunraku for like a really long time, along with a lot of other stuff. So, till then.